Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Skipdown, and this is the Top 5 Weekly. This month, as if you haven't, if you saw last week's episode, you know we're doing a classics month of the Top 5 Weekly. Last week we did Alfred Hitchcock, and this week we're doing Humphrey Bogart. So, I'm such a big fan of this actor, and I'm glad I found a couple people that want to discuss his filmography with me. And with that being said, Andrew, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew, back again this week. All this month, we're talking my favorite, and that is classic movies. And this week, we are hitting one of the big names in classic films, in American classic films, and that is the great Humphrey Bogart. Kind of just an all-time classic actor that I think a lot of people know of, but they haven't really delved into his filmography. So hopefully we'll be shedding some light on some films that you may or may not know of.
And a new guest on the show, Jeremy. Introduce yourself.
Hey guys, I'm Jeremy Adams. I'm so glad to be here talking classic movies, one of my favorite subjects. And when I went to film school and everything, one of the main names that would always come up was Humphrey Bogart. You can't talk about classic cinema without talking about this great actor and the great filmmakers he worked with in the classic era. So I'm so glad to be here today talking about him.
We're glad to have you. So with that being said, Andrew, let's get it started. What is your number 5 Humphrey Bogart film?
Okay, Dan. My number 5 is a film that I consider a quintessential film noir classic, and that is The Maltese Falcon. This film is from 1941. It's one of the earliest film noirs. It, I believe, started around the same time as the film Double Indemnity, which is also kind of the start of the film noir genre. But this film, of course, stars Humphrey Bogart, Mary Astor, Peter Lorre, Sidney Greenstreet. All of these are names that were all around in the 1940s. A lot of names that people are probably familiar with. I mean, Humphrey Bogart, Peter Lorre, and Sidney Greenstreet were in another famous Humphrey Bogart film that I won't talk about yet because chances are someone will talk about it eventually. But this film has all of the hallmarks of the film noir. Humphrey Bogart plays the detective. There's a MacGuffin, which is the Maltese Falcon that everyone is trying to get, but it's all about the journey and not so much the destination, as it seems to go with MacGuffin-driven films. And it is directed by John Huston, who is really an underrated director. He directed a lot of great films. He directed a few films with Humphrey Bogart, kind of got some of the best work out of Humphrey Bogart. So I'm really glad for that. But Mary Astor plays a classic femme fatale, someone who is possibly a romantic interest, but she's also not good for you. She may stab you in the back at any point. And this film all centers around everyone looking for this Maltese Falcon. And it's a really interesting caper of a story. If you haven't seen this film, like I said, it is an all-time classic. So I highly recommend you do. It's a great, great film.
All right, Jeremy, it's your time.
Okay, for my number 5, I'm going to go with something that might be a little bit of a deeper cut. This is a movie that I remember watching as a teenager on, I think it was TCM, not knowing anything about it, and it just completely blowing my mind. It's a film called Dark Passage. It's from 1947. It's one of the key film noir movies from that era. And the interesting hook in this movie is, in the first half of the film, we get the POV of this character. His name is Vincent Perry. Well, actually, that's not his real name, but we have another name for the character. But you don't actually, you're seeing things from his perspective. Like the whole thing is filmed, so you're seeing, everything that he's doing. And then something happened where he has to actually change his identity and get plastic surgery, and he actually turns himself into Humphrey Bogart for the second half of the film. And then it turns into a more standard film noir story. And it's one of the movies that Humphrey made with Lauren Bacall. One of like the third or fourth movie they did together. And it was directed by a filmmaker named Delmer Daves, and it's a really interesting, just really cool movie. And I just remember not really seeing anything like it, especially from that era. And then around that same time, I was a big fan of the show Tales from the Crypt, and there was an episode where they basically did a variation on this movie, Dark Passage, directed by Robert Zemeckis, where the whole thing was kind of a POV sort of episode, and they actually had Humphrey Bogart's image that they licensed for the episode. So it was the same kind of thing. And I believe he was actually a character that had died, but he was still like kind of awake. And the whole thing, it was a POV episode of Tales from the Crypt. And it was this like otherworldly thing, but it was all in the film noir style and all based on Dark Passage from a great filmmaker. Zemeckis paying his respects. So it's just a mind-blowing, interesting movie, and one that doesn't get talked of as much as a lot of the other ones.
Wow, great choice. Well, I mean, I live in Florida, so what more? Why would I not choose Key Largo? My number 5. Key Largo is based on the Keys of Florida, which is, if you haven't been there, it's a amazing part of Florida. It's down past Miami. You go past Miami, you go to these Keys, and we end up with this this guy who was a military guy, and Frank McCloud, and he was like the CEO of this kid, and the kid is from the Keys, and so he comes to visit the kid's family in the Keys. Well, they end up in a hurricane. You can't have Florida unless you have hurricanes. So all of these people in this like little hotel are stuck in this hotel, and we have people like, and Jeremy just mentioned Lauren Bacall. This is the last film that Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall did together. They've worked together 4 times, and we also have Edward G. Robinson. If you don't know Edward G. Robinson, he's considered one of the big gangster actors of the day. And if you've watched Bugs Bunny or those kind of animated cartoons of the the accent that they have, yeah, I'm gonna get you, man. Well, that's the kind of character that Edward G. Robinson plays, that they take off that voice of his gangster characters. So he kidnaps all these people in this hotel, and then there's a climactic scene on a boat, which I might add is the name of Humphrey Bogart's actual boat, the Santana. He named his boat the Santana. He names the boat in the film the Santana as a tribute to his boat. He's a sailor when he's not doing his film stuff. He was out on the ocean and stuff, doing stuff like that. So, and if you know of the filmography of Humphrey Bogart, he did a lot of films early in his days where he was in movies with Edward G. Robinson, and Edward G. Robinson got the better of him most of the time, all the time, as a matter of fact. But this time, the tide is turned, and Humphrey Bogart's Frank McCloud gets the better of Edward G. Robinson in Key Largo. So, I mean, if you want to see a movie set in the Keys in a beautiful setting, and even though it is black and white, and Lauren Bacall and him are actually they actually became husband and wife. Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall became husband and wife. So he's acting opposite his wife in this film. But it's a really good film. There's so many films very similar to this, but because of the actors of Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall and Edward G. Robinson and people like that, and Lionel Barrymore also is in this film. So if you haven't seen Key Largo, you're missing out. It's a really fun film set in the midst of a hurricane. All right, Andrew, what is your number 4?
My number 4 is a classic film that I think a lot of people are aware of, and that is The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. This film is another film coincidentally directed by John Huston. Like I said, John Huston and Humphrey Bogart teamed up a lot, and this film is set in Mexico, and it has to deal with gold mining. And Humphrey Bogart and this other character are kind of fall into this gold mine, and then they're trying to hit it rich. They're trying to get as much gold as they can. And what this film shows is how much greed can corrupt you, how much it can make you crazy, how much it can make you do things that you wouldn't normally do. And this whole idea is that this gold mine is way out there. So the farther you get out there, you're more susceptible to losing your mind. And this film is one of Humphrey Bogart's best films. I think it's one that a lot of people really need to watch because it is a great performance from Humphrey Bogart, one of his best of all time. The film also stars Walter Huston, who is actually John Huston's father. The Hustons are one of those kind of Hollywood royalty families, if you will, like the Barrymores. Like Dan just mentioned, Lionel Barrymore is part of the whole Barrymore acting family, and so are the Hustons. And it's a really good film, and I highly recommend people checking it out.
Yeah, I think one of us might have that on our list before this show is over, so I won't give out my hand yet. Jeremy, what is your number 4?
Okay, for my number 4, the one thing that you kind of have to keep in mind when you're looking at Humphrey Bogart's career is that what really defined him was he wasn't ever really just the flat-out hero. He was always pushing it. He was always a conflicted character, a character that had demons they had to deal with, or he had to try to make the right decision. And I think when you get into the 1950s, you see him pushing that further and further. How far can he take this into the realm of possibly villain or anti-hero? And for me, my personal favorite performance in his entire career is from the film The Caine Mutiny in 1954. This was a Technicolor production. It was directed by Edward Dmytryk. And basically, it's set in World War II, and the first part of the movie is just there's these young sailors. An actor named Van Johnson is kind of our main key character, and they're on this ship, and they're excited to be a part of the effort, and it's this like rousing thing. But they have this captain, and his name is Queeg, the commander of the ship. And slowly you begin to see, this is Humphrey Bogart, that there's something a little off with this character. And the way that he behaves, the way that he treats the men under him, something is strange. He's got weird ways of doing things, and you begin to realize he has some form of obsessive compulsive disorder, and it begins to really affect his leadership on the ship. And eventually it turns into a court story at the end. And is the commander able to do whatever he wants as a commander? And are these guys able to stand up to him? What do the laws really say in this situation? It becomes really interesting. And you're just going back and forth on how do you feel about this character, and especially the fact that it's this great actor that we have so much invested in from other films playing this character, and there's so much conflict in just the way that he plays it and the little ticks and this was in the time when the method was a new thing. There were a lot of young actors, Marlon Brando and James Dean and others, that were doing the method. And it's so fascinating to see the way that a classic actor like Humphrey Bogart would portray this kind of character that these actors may have portrayed with tics, with a mental disorder, and the way that he approached it. And it's fascinating. And I do say, as a counterpoint, there was a TV movie version called The Caine Mutiny Court Martial in the 80s, directed by Robert Altman, which is only the trial part. You don't actually see anything that occurs on the ship. And it's just fascinating to put those two next to each other and see how they tackle this story and the issue that's in it, and what do we really think of this commander. So, Caine Mutiny, great film.
Good choice. You guys have all had great choices. I'll tell you what. My number 4 is a film I just recently saw. I had never seen it before, and I owe that to Andrew and my other friend Steven, who recommended this film to me. And I've been a Humphrey Bogart fan for many, many years, and I had never seen this film. And you want to talk about a side of Humphrey Bogart I don't think we've ever seen before, and that's In a Lonely Place, where he is a screenwriter, and he gets involved with this neighbor upstairs of his apartment, and she's played by Gloria Graham, and it seems like he's a good guy. His name is Dixon Steele. He seems like a good guy, and then we find out that he might be involved in this murder. We don't know if he was the one that did the murder, because she came to his apartment and wanted to get his advice on something, or help him with something, and then he sent her away in a cab. Now, we see that as the viewer of the film, but we don't know where she ended up going once she ended up leaving Dixon Steele. She had a boyfriend. We don't know if he was the killer or not, but we do start to see the true nature of Dixon Steele as the story goes forward, and his buddies that are like police people and so forth. He is not a nice guy. He starts to unravel as this film goes forward, and you don't really see that a lot with Humphrey Bogart. Now, the other thing is, this is one of the few films he got away from Warner Brothers. He was on Warner Brothers as a contract actor for many, many years with Warner Brothers. He got away and started his own production company, and this is one of the films that he did, and because he was looking for some different kind of roles. And I'll tell you what, this is a really sinister character, but he plays it so just cool. You don't really know it. You just have these different little nuances in the film where it's, uh-oh, what is he doing now? And then at the end of the film, he really lets go. And there's a really nasty scene at the end of this film. But I had never seen In a Lonely Place before, and this is a role that I never expected from Humphrey Bogart. I never, because he's always like the gangster or the good guy or the cool guy, you know. He's not this kind of guy that kind of unravels. We've seen this role before, afterwards, actually, later in the years to come, in movies in the 70s and 80s, where people just gradually start unraveling as the film goes forward. And I think this might be a precursor to a lot of those types of films. So I had number 4, In a Lonely Place. And we're going back to Andrew. What is your number 3?
My number 3 is The Big Sleep. Big Sleep is a film based on the book of the same name, written by Raymond Chandler. And what is interesting, one of the people who worked on the screenplay for this film was William Faulkner, the famous American author. So that's kind of interesting. But this film is also directed by Howard Hawks, a very famous American film director. I highly recommend people checking out his work. But this film is another one of the films that he starred with alongside his wife, Lauren Bacall. It seems like we are just running the gamut of all the Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart films tonight. And this film, he plays the iconic character of Philip Marlowe, who is a part of this long-running book series that many of them got turned into movies. Philip Marlowe was played by a bunch of different actors, including Robert Mitchum and Elliot Gould in the 70s with a film, the film directed by Robert Altman. So this is a character that has popped up a lot in films, but I think the Humphrey Bogart version of this character is the most well-known, is the most iconic, and is probably the best that has been on screen. This film has a lot of quippy dialogue, a lot of very intelligent dialogue. There's a lot of back and forth and banter between the characters, and there's a lot of interplay within them as well. And this film is also a detective story. Philip Marlowe is a private investigator. He is hired in a case by this wealthy guy who his youngest daughter is being blackmailed, and he wants this investigated. He wants to get the evidence back and all this kind of stuff. And this leads Philip Marlowe down a road of kind of murder and betrayal and red herrings, and you're just trying to figure out who did what when and how is everything connected. And it's a great detective story. I highly recommend reading the book as well as watching the movie, because they're both slightly different from one another, but they're both just fascinating detective stories, very much online with kind of a pulp novel, if you will, but they're both really good. Raymond Chandler wrote a lot of these kind of detective novels, and that is kind of how he made his career. And like I said, a lot of his books got turned into movies, and this one is probably the best one.
All right. Yeah, The Big Chill. That was one of the films I wanted to watch, but I couldn't find it before recording the show. I hadn't seen it in so long, I just wanted to revisit it. But what are you gonna do? You can't see everything. So, Jeremy, what's your number 3?
All right, for my number 3, I'm going to say a name that's been said a lot so far, John Huston. And when you think of John Huston, it is most John Huston-y. You think of the crazy stories of the making of this film, The African Queen. A lot of it was filmed in the African continent. There are a lot of crazy stories that went on, and it's really at its heart, it's another World War II set story, but it's the sweet love story between this hard-drinking boat captain who has to go on this secret mission, and he has to take along a nun, played by Audrey Hepburn. And the story between these two is so touching, so funny, and Humphrey's performance is just he's just one of the most likable characters you can imagine, even though, again, a very flawed character, a character who's got his demons, but he's just got this soft side that this woman brings out in him. And even though there's all this craziness, the stories that have been told about the making of the film, it's such just a solid piece of entertainment. It's so focused, and you're just so into it the whole time. Nothing ever gets away from this main through line that you're following. And again, to throw out another film, there was a movie made by Clint Eastwood in 1990 called White Hunter, Black Heart. Very interesting movie that's really not so loosely based on the making of this film, with Clint Eastwood playing the John Huston part, this crazed director who's putting his crew through all these crazy things. So fascinating movie, and I do also have to say this is the one for which Humphrey won his Best Actor Oscar. So, and there's a little bit of controversy behind it because he beat Brando for Streetcar Named Desire, which is considered one of the important performances of its era. But that aside, it's really one of his signature roles, and it's one of his most vulnerable and just lovable characters. Very different from something like In a Lonely Place, like you said, or The Keene Mutiny. He's really tapping into a different side of his persona here, and I just think it's such a great and one of the all-time great characters for me. So, African Queen.
Yeah, I had it in my honorable mentions. You can only put 5 on your list, but I definitely love that film. It's such a great film. And of course, there's a good documentary about the African Queen, making of the African Queen, and a lot of the things that were going on during that film. There's a lot of photos, a lot of videos. You can go and find a lot of the material about because Lauren Bacall recorded a lot of stuff around the filming of that movie. So it's out there if you want to see some of the background of the filming of the African Queen. My number 3 is Andrew's number 4, I believe. Did you have Treasure of the Sierra Madre at 4, Andrew?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, Treasure of the Sierra Madre. I mean, what a crazy, crazy ride. You got this bum who's, in Mexico, and he's just kind of bumming around asking people for money. And one of the guys he asked for money, he asked this guy 3 times. It's John Huston. It's the director of the film. He bums money off him 3 times. He's like, dude, stop hitting me up for money here. Come on, man. Oh, well, I didn't even look at your face. I'm just looking at the hand and the money. Well, he ends up meeting this other kid, and they end up doing this side job, and they become friends. And that he's portrayed by Tim Holt in the film. And they meet this old codger played by Walter Huston, and he starts getting in their head where there could be gold in them dark mountains. And so they go, they get together and they start doing a little bit of gold prospecting, but they go way out. And what happens is Humphrey Bogart's character starts, he starts the Dobbs character really starts to lose it, and he thinks everybody's trying to steal his goods. That's what they call their bags of gold that they find. All the gold that they found, they put them in a bag and they call it the goods. I love it how they call the gold the goods. You're gonna steal my goods? No, I'm not gonna. And it's just kind of funny. It's got some comedic moments, and Walter Huston's got a classic scene where he's just laughing and jumping, and he's got this kind of prospector-y kind of feel to him. That's a famous scene. If you go back to like AFI's top 100 quotes. I think it's one of the quotes where he's just like laughing and jumping around, and he's kind of funny in the film. But it is a crazy ride what these guys go on in Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and you're dealing with like Bambinos, like Mexican bad guys. These guys is going to start robbing people. Then you get the basically the police that are chasing them. So you got a lot of different variables going on. But the main thing is Dobbs is losing his mind the further and further they get away from the little town and the further the film goes. So I don't want to spoil it, but Dobbs gets his in the end. I had to say it. But this is a really fun film. If you haven't seen this one, it's a different character for Humphrey Bogart. All right, we're going back in.
I'm sorry. Can I just jump in and say that one just didn't quite make my list because I ain't got to show you any stinking badges. but I love that movie. I believe it's the first. I believe that's the first Bogart movie I saw as a kid, and I remember my dad explaining to me about the Hustons. Oh, sorry, sorry, you still seeing me there?
Yeah, we got your.
Okay.
We got your camera photo, but that's fine. We can just go to.
Okay. Okay.
Andrew,
I'll try to fix that. Oh, go ahead.
Andrew,
yeah, I'll go with my number. We're down to 2.
Yep, we're down to 2.
Yeah, my number 2 is a film that Dan already mentioned, and that is In a Lonely Place. I battled between putting this at 1 or putting this at 2, but I decided to put it at 2 because I think my number 1 is reserved for something that is truly my favorite. But In a Lonely Place, there's not much more I can say about the film that Dan has not already said. I mean, he kind of covered all of the basis of it, and I'm glad he was able to see it for what I assume is the first time and kind of understand why it is so revered. It's one of those films that you don't hear brought up when people talk about Humphrey Bogart. They all talk about a lot of the other films that we have discussed here tonight, but I didn't hear about In a Lonely Place until just a few years ago when I was like really looking into his work, and this film kept coming up, and I'm like, what is this? And In a Lonely Place is one of his best performances of his career. It is truly fantastic. It is later in his career. It is 1950. He would pass away sadly in 1957, so it is one of his last truly great performances in his career. But it is directed by Nicholas Ray, who was a director who I believe was far ahead of his time. Like Dan was saying, he was making films that we wouldn't really see contextually until a few decades later. With this film, with Rebel Without a Cause, and a couple of his other films, truly ahead of his time. And this film is another one that's dealing with very grayish character when it comes to morality. This character is not necessarily a good guy. He's not necessarily a bad guy, but you see just the layers that Humphrey Bogart is able to bring to this character, and I think it really speaks volumes for his abilities as an actor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just can't say I'm still affected by the film, and I just watched it like a couple days ago, and I'm still affected by it because it's such a gripping performance by him, and you've seen so many actors do this similar role, and now I know where they got it from because they got it from this movie. And then I did hear something that In a Lonely Place had become a movie that at the time kind of flew under the radar, but now as the years have gone by, it's becoming more and more admired by critics and film historians and people like that. So that's a good thing, Andrew. All right, Jeremy, are you ready to go for your number 2?
That's me? Sorry.
Yep.
Okay, my number 2, it's going to be one that you guys talked about, and that's The Maltese Falcon, the John Huston film from 1941, and this is the one that really launched Bogart from kind of a contract player to a big-name star. It is the film noir classic and everything that was said before, and I just want to talk about the movie by telling a little bit of a personal story. I was in film school a time back, and we had a class where they showed us a lot of the classic films, and it was a bunch of us, late teens, early 20s people, and we're sitting to watch the Maltese Falcon on a big screen, and a lot of people had never seen the film. And it was, I believe they were playing it off of a DVD, projecting it, and about halfway through the movie, the whole thing went out of sync, and the professor had left. He wasn't there. So we basically watched the last half of this movie out of sync. The movie ended, and I didn't hear anything like, oh, that was terrible, or that was so hard to watch. It was just people talking about the movie, having enjoyed it, being wrapped up in the story. So I think just this story, this character about this detective and everything he has to uncover, even out of sync, it still plays, and it plays so many years later. And you can't go wrong with the line, "The stuff that dreams are made of." It's just one of the all-time classic lines, and you just can't, think about movies and classic movies without that line coming up in the conversation somewhere. And just a great film. And for launching the career of a director like John Huston, his first film, it's pretty astounding, and also kind of helping launch the film noir genre as we know it. So,
yeah, and another word with the Maltese Falcon that you can't help but know is a gentleman by the name of Roger Ebert coined this phrase, as far as I'm concerned, and it's the phrase of MacGuffin. And in MacGuffin, we're going to get into MacGuffin a little bit more before this show is over, but MacGuffin is an item that people are looking for, or they lost, or whatever, and it's an item that gets the plot of the film from point A to point B to point C, and so forth and so forth. And in the Maltese Falcon, which is my number 2 film as well, Jeremy, it's the Maltese Falcon. This is the MacGuffin of the film. You have these characters, and Andrew said it, Peter Lorre, Sidney Greenstreet. We're gonna talk about these guys before the show is over again. They are some of the better character actors of the time, and there's a reason why these guys. Sidney Greenstreet was like 62 years old when he got the role in Maltese Falcon, and he does something like 22 films after this before he dies. And he started his career at 62, but it shows what a great character actor he is. And of course, we all know Peter Lorre. I mean, the guy is in a million films of that era, but he's really a sinister character in this. And we're dealing with romantic interests. We're dealing with all kinds of different murder of a special investigator who works for the Humphrey Bogart character in Maltese Falcon. I got his name right here. Oh God, what's his name? Sam Spade. Sam Spade, yeah. The main character of the. Now, this is the 3rd remake. It's the 3rd time they basically made this film in a span of about 7 or 8 years. But this is the one that caught on. Why did it catch on? Peter Lorre, John Huston, Humphrey Bogart. That quote that Jeremy said, these are what dreams are made of. That version was the version that caught on, where the other 2 versions didn't catch on. They just weren't any good. They were kind of drab and just not a fun movie to watch. But the Maltese Falcon really was. I'm sorry for coughing. You don't know who's going to have the upper hand by the end of this film, and that's what's great. And who's going to end up being taking the fall for the murder of the investigator who works for Sam Spade. So it's interesting. You got to watch it all the ways to the end, because you think it's going to be one guy, then it turns out to be somebody else. But the cops are searching and searching. They're like, they want somebody. I think Sam Spade killed his partner and whatnot. So it's kind of fun to watch this film from beginning to end and see who ends up taking the fall for the investigator's murder, and what exactly is the Maltese Falcon in this MacGuffin in this film. So it's a real fun film to watch, The Maltese Falcon. And I mean, I like I said before, I can put money on it. I think that we're all going to have the same number one. But you know what? I want to hear both of you guys talk about this film, and I'm going to have you guys listen to me talk about my love of this film. So this is going to be very fun for me to listen to what you guys have to say about your number one film. I feel I have kind of understand which it could be. So Andrew, take it away.
Shocker of the century. My number one is a film I've talked about before, perhaps not here, but certainly on my channel, certainly with fellow film friends, and that is Casablanca. Casablanca is a film that really was a bit of an awakening to classic American cinema for me, because when I first started getting into old American cinema, the classic American cinema, Casablanca was one of the first films I ever watched. It was one of the first Blu-rays I ever bought. It was just something that has been the genesis of my love and passion for classic movies. And this film is one of the quintessential all-time classics. I mean, it is referenced in pop culture constantly. It is referenced in movies and music and everything. I mean, people quote this movie all the time. Of course, it stars Humphrey Bogart, who we've talked about here a lot tonight, but also stars my favorite actress of all time, and that is Ingrid Bergman. Once again, you get Sidney Greenstreet, Peter Lorre are also in this film, but you also get one of my favorite character actors of all time, and that is Claude Rains. I think he is so underrated. He did so many different roles in his career, and he is just one of the all-time greats, in my opinion. We also have Paul Henreid, who is another underrated actor that I think did a lot of great work. He doesn't get much credit for, and it's nice to go back and see all of these actors and all of these classic names that you know and see them on screen. And this film is just gorgeous in every sense. It's about so many different things. It's a romance, it's a drama, but it's also a film set in World War II. And it deals with kind of, wartime politics and, occupation and the French government and all kind of stuff like that. And it's all set around this nightclub called Rick's Place. Everybody knows Rick's. You know what I mean? It's just a wonderful film that feels like a dream sometimes. It's just the way it's captured. It's that gorgeous black and white film that you associate with the 1940s movies. And it's one of my all-time favorites. When I first started my channel once upon a time, well, a year ago actually, not that long ago, I did a whole review of the movie and the Blu-ray. It looks bad, just aesthetically, because I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but it still has a lot of heart in it because I love the movie so much. So go back and check that out. I mean, so many people have talked about this. So that's all I have to say about it.
All right, German.
I don't know what you guys are talking. My number one, Sabrina, of course. Just kidding. It's Casablanca, of course. So basically, my way into talking about Casablanca is I was very lucky as a kid that my dad loved classic movies, and he would show me a lot of classic movies at a pretty young age, and to me it was just that was just part of my childhood as much as any cartoons or any movies that were popular at the time. I just loved watching these movies. But sometimes as a kid, you have a little bit of a skewed perspective, because I just remember him showing me a lot of these films starring this great actor, Claude Rains, who we mentioned before. I remember first seeing The Adventures of Robin Hood and then Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And then I'm like, oh, we're going to watch this movie Casablanca with Claude Rains. It's a Claude Rains movie. I don't even think I was really aware of Bogart or Bergman or any of that stuff. And I just remember watching this movie and loving it and loving Claude Rains' character, and then being like, oh, it's this character Rick, and just kind of having these vague ideas at being 6 or 7 and just enjoying this movie. And then, of course, later on, discovering the movie's actual significance and what it really means in classic cinema. And for me, I think what really resonates with me most is the idea of, we think of classic Hollywood movies and we think of movies at large as having these happy endings. And this is one of the great classic movies that doesn't necessarily have the happy ending that we're used to seeing. This is a story about self-sacrifice. This is a story about putting something else above yourself and your own dreams, and really doing the right thing rather than the thing that makes you necessarily happy. And I think that's one of the main reasons that it resonates, and it resonates for me. And you can talk about the directing of Michael Curtiz and all the great actors and everything that goes into this film, but for me, I think what really makes it so classic is that theme of, yes, you want to be happy in life and you want to be, find somebody that you love and all these things, but really life is sometimes about things that are greater, and you can actually serve a greater purpose. And even if you've been a selfish person, you can put that aside and do something that's greater. And it's always going to resonate. It resonates with movies like The Shawshank Redemption and other great films. And I think Casablanca personifies that for me, like as much as any other film. And I think for me personally, that's kind of what makes it the classic that it is, because it was really just made as a programmer. It wasn't like the people making it thought they were making this, movie that would be considered one of the all-time greats. But I think that theme and the characters and the way that it all plays, it just resonates more than other films from that era.
Yeah, well, I just want to take you guys to Rick's Cafe America.
Ah!
Talk
Nice
about
reveal.
Yeah,
Rick.
I want that shirt.
Rick is one of the all-time great characters in movie history, and one of my favorite characters of all time in movies. I'm obviously, Andrew and Jeremy, you're just getting to know me a little bit now, but Andrew's known me a long time. He knows I'm a huge movie fan, and my number one favorite movie of all time is Casablanca. This very similar to Jeremy. I had a TV station in Boston called TV 38, and they had different kinds of films early in the morning. Holidays, they'd have Christmas films, and then one Saturday it'd be gangster films, one Saturday it'd be westerns, one Saturday it'd be monster movies. And whatever reason, I ended up watching at 6 years old Casablanca, and I became enamored with this film as the years have gone by. I watch it every year, sometimes twice a year. I actually watched it today with commentary by Roger Ebert just to revisit it. I mean, I love this film so much. I mean, going back to some of the stuff that you guys said, you're dealing with people like Peter Lorre as Ugarte, and Sidney Greenstreet as he owns the Blue Parrot, and he's kind of like the shady kind of guy to Rick's cool and debonair kind of guy. And then you got Ingrid Bergman as Ilsa Lund, and Paul Henreid as Victor Laszlo, and you got Claude Rains as Captain Renault. But then you have a lot these really kind of smaller characters in the film that are just so cool. You got Dooley Wilson as Sam, and Sam, of course, everybody says play it again. That is not in the movie. Play it again. Sam is not in the movie. We do hear play it, Sam. If you could play it for her, you could play it for me. Play as time goes by. And this song that unbelievably didn't become a hit the way it was in the movie, because they could not get the rights to that version of the song, and they ended up having the rights to a different version of that song on the airwaves at the time. And so we never get to hear that song outside of Casablanca, because it was some rights thing with Dooley Wilson and then the film and whatnot. So that song, Play It, Sam, Play As Time Goes By, you're only going to hear it in that film, that version in the film, played by Dooley Wilson. Then you deal with so many cool things. And you want to talk about film noir, there's a lot of film noir aspects to it. The shade, the way they have the crossing bars and the crisscrossing of the lights, and then you have like a spotlight that comes down, and it starts moving around from the airport. It tells you how close the airport is to Rick's Cafe American. Then you have like these characters that are like, they do a great job with like the scenery of the streets and all the different characters, like the seedy underbelly of this world of Casablanca. You know, there's a lot of like people from all over the world, all different walks of life that are forced to come to this place because of what the Germans are doing in France and so many different parts of the world. So you have that kind of. And another thing is George Lucas. A lot of folks are inspired by Casablanca. George Lucas actually took the Cafe American set and he used it in Star Wars as the Mos Eisley Cantina. And you can look that up. And Roger Ebert himself, I just said I watched the commentary of Casablanca with Roger Ebert, which is great. I highly recommend it if you haven't done it. He writes a book called A Kiss is Still a Kiss. So if you haven't read that book by Roger Ebert, came out in the 70s. It's probably out of print now, but you can still get copies of it. A Kiss is Still a Kiss. That tells you how much Roger Ebert loves Casablanca as much as we all do and I do. But Humphrey Bogart's Rick, he's such a his character is torn between the love of Ilsa and I don't stick my neck out for anybody. You know, we hear him use those words multiple times in the film, but when it comes down to it, he's a good guy at heart, and he knows that he has to help her out and send her on that plane with Victor Laszlo. Spoiler, this movie came out 75 years ago, 1943. So if you haven't seen it, it's not my fault. It's your fault. But so he has to send Elsa with Victor on the plane with the letters of transit, which I might add, we're going to use the word MacGuffin again. The MacGuffin are the letters of transit. They start at the beginning of the movie with Peter Lorre's Ugarte, and they work their way throughout the film. Of course, Rick hides them in the piano. Of course, you know, nobody can find the letters. Rick hides them in the piano. We saw him put them in the piano. But one of my favorite things in all of film is quotes. And when you have certain lines in films, so many lines in films are so famous. This film has 6 of the 100 greatest movie quotes of all time in it. On AFI's 100 greatest movie quotes of all time. There's 6 of them from this movie. That tells you how great this movie, how memorable the lines. And like Andrew said, look, they made a movie. It's called The Usual Suspects. Round up the usual suspects. We'll always have Paris. Something tells me, Louis, there's the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I mean, just here's looking at you, kid. I mean, there's just so many great lines in this film, and they're so memorable. And that's kind of why I love this film. But there's so many other things about it. Every time I watch Casablanca, I see something new that I have never seen. If you just look in it and analyze it over and over again, like I do every time I watch it, and like the airport scene, like there's a plane that they're all gonna Victor and Ilsa's gonna get on this plane, but the actual plane is a prop. And you see people walking around. They're actual midgets. They're midgets. They put them in a cloud. They put them in shadow, so you can't see because the plane is in the foreground or the background, and you're in the foreground with Captain Renault and Rick and so forth. So they put midgets walking around this prop to make it look like there's real people walking around the plane. There's things like that, and then like. There's a scene where Rick gets this letter from Ilsa in Paris, and she runs off with Victor, and Dooley comes and he delivers the letter to him, and then he gets on the train and there's no rain. His trench coat is completely dry. He goes from the rain to the train, and there's no rain on him. So there's stuff like that, little nitpicky things that you can look for, but it doesn't matter. This film is such a great film. All those little nitpicky things, we don't care. We don't care about that stuff. We just care about how amazing this film is, and what a great film. And on the last AFI's 100 greatest films of all time, it was number 2 behind Vertigo. I'm hoping on the next time they do the AFI 100, it's number 1, because it's number 1 in my heart. So it should be number 1 in everybody's heart. But Andrew, do you got any honorable mentions? I know I went on a lot about. I just love Casablanca.
That was an epic tangent by one Dan Skip Allen about Casablanca. That's his full review. You don't need to hear him talk about the movie ever again. But yeah, of course, all the films that you guys mentioned that I didn't mention, Dark Passage, The African Queen, Key Largo. I was so close to putting Key Largo on my list. I love Key Largo. Another couple of films, To Have and Have Not. The film is good. It's not great, but it's important because it is the film that Humphrey Bogart met Lauren Bacall on, and they fell in love and got married. And the story goes on from there. But High Sierra is another film. Sabrina. Actually, when Jeremy mentioned Sabrina as his number 1, I thought he was real. I thought it was real because Sabrina is a great movie. I mean, it's more known for Audrey Hepburn than Humphrey Bogart, but yeah, I love Sabrina. If you want to go back a kind of pre-1940s Humphrey Bogart, check out the film The Petrified Forest, where he plays a tough guy. He plays the bad guy in that. Check out the film The Roaring Twenties, another film where he plays kind of a bad guy. And then kind of another film where he has a small role. That is Dark Victory, starring Bette Davis. He has a much smaller role in that. That was before really anyone knew who he was. But yeah, there are so many Humphrey Bogart films you could watch. I mean, Passage to Marseille is another one. Just so many. I mean, we could have done a top 10 this week of all the Humphrey Bogart films. That would have been an easier list than the top 5. Top 5 is tough with Humphrey Bogart.
Andrew named quite a few honorable mentions, Jeremy, but do you have any that he hasn't mentioned?
Yeah, one of my favorites that it was hard to leave off is The Desperate Hours, which is one of the later Bogart movies where he plays another darker character, somebody that actually holds a family hostage in their home. And it's just another fascinating role for him, and it had an interesting remake with Mickey Rourke. And then I just have to echo you guys on In a Lonely Place, which is such a great, fascinating film noir story. And I'll throw out one of the weirder movies of his, Beat the Devil, which is a John Huston film. A really interesting kind of lower key John Huston Bogart collaboration. And then I also want to mention one that was already mentioned, The Roaring Twenties, which I happened to catch on TCM, and just a really fun gangster movie from that 30s era. And it's so interesting to see the contract player, the supporting actor Bogart in that time period.
Well, I'll tell you what, I had some honorable mentions, but you guys have took all of my honorable mentions, or you had them on your list. So I don't have any honorable mentions. I mean, I think what Bogart did somewhere in the neighborhood of 70-something films. Am I right, Andrew?
I'd have to look that up, but yeah, he did a lot. Like, unfortunately, he passed away rather young. Like I mentioned earlier, he passed away at 57 from esophageal cancer of the esophagus. And apparently, he was very ill towards the end of his life, which is really unfortunate because I think had he lived, he would have been in more films and giving us even greater roles. He does have 85 official credits on IMDb, but those include, of course, uncredited and other stuff like that. So I'm not quite sure how many feature films. He does have 85 credits.
All right. Okay, good. All right. Well, this is the end of the show. Andrew, where can you be found?
You can find me on Twitter at Capzilla06, as well as my YouTube channel, Capzilla Productions.
And Jeremy?
I have a YouTube channel as well. It's just under Jeremy Paul Adams, and I'm also part of the Movie Trivia Schmodown Fan Reaction League that we just started recently. It's a really cool thing that I'm so happy to be part of, where the people in the league film themselves reacting to the Movie Trivia Schmodown, which I think we all love. The first rounds we play along, and we keep scores as the show goes on. And right now I'm ranked number 3, so I'm happy about that. And we've also started doing our own trivia matches, and I'm the main question writer. So it's just a lot of fun, and I hope more people can check it out.
Yeah, I'm hoping to be involved in that a little bit. Right now, I'm kind of busy with a lot of other things going on, but I'm going to try to get involved with you, Jeremy. You can find me at Dan Skip Allen on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. Also, I'm involved with the Best Damn Movie Show channel. Obviously, that's where this is the top 5 weekly every week. This is the second episode of our classic months, where we're doing classic topic, actor, director, actress, and so forth. And last week we did Alfred Hitchcock. Obviously, this week we did Humphrey Bogart. Next week we're doing Audrey Hepburn. So if you like what you watched, please feel free to watch next week's episode with Audrey Hepburn. And Andrew and Stephen and myself and Billy and Mark also have contributed to the 52 must-see movies and why they matter special series that I've been doing. And I just put the third man up yesterday. So if you want to hear very knowledgeable people talk about classic films and why they're essential viewing for people everywhere to watch, then you should check out this series, the 52 must-see movies and why they matter. Also, my podcast, I haven't done an episode in 3 or 4 weeks. So I'm going to get back on that with my co-host, Vincent Spada. So for Andrew and for Jeremy, good night.